Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Thanks for listening to the show. Join your hosts, Bill Alvstad and Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, hi, Seahawks fans. Welcome back to another episode of the Seahawks Playbook podcast. I'm your host, Bill Alvstad, sitting down with co-host Keith Myers here to talk Seahawks football. Today's show is kind of a makeup show because last episode we promised to get to the rookie grades for the 2024 season, and we did not. So we're going to do a standalone show here to talk about the rookie class. Keith, welcome in.
Yeah. And if anyone's wondering why we don't start off the show with an update on the offensive coordinator search, which is what we've done, ever since that move was made, it's because, well, nothing's changed. It's only been, a few minutes. So,
right. Yeah, we did that on the previous episode where we talked about the defensive and offensive awards and all that kind of stuff. So you can find that there.
So,
all right. Rookie class. Okay. So in the offseason, Keith, in 2024, Pete Carroll goes, John Schneider goes, we need to hire a new coach. That search lasted about 3 weeks, which was about 2 weeks longer than we had hoped for, but ended up getting the right guy, turns out.
Mm-hmm.
And Mike McDonald and company, though, did not, did not have the time to do any of the scouting. They didn't go to the Senior Bowl. They didn't go to the Combine. It was all John Schneider and all the staff, scouts and so forth, area scouts, that did all of that work.
Yeah, the Senior Bowl happened before Mike McDonald had his staff put together.
Yeah.
Like he had like a skeleton crew of a coaching staff when the Senior Bowl was going on. So the whole thing came down to John Snyder and a few scouts, and didn't have the rest of the team. Like over half the people that usually have input on putting these evaluations together just weren't there. But yeah, so it was a difficult situation for Snyder and company.
Yeah.
It really was.
And Mike McDonald and company. It really was. And so this offseason will prove to be, I think, much smoother, much better, a lot more input from those that need to be involved from the very beginning. But nonetheless, all the scouting, all the draft lead up took place. We went through the process with you. We ended up having like a couple players in each of our buckets that we had talked about previously being selected. Which usually happens, but the kind of players that we talk about throughout the season are the kind of players that we think the Seahawks are looking at, and that always, tends to be spot on for the most part. And overall, before we get into individual players, what did you think of the process? We already talked about it initially; it was somewhat difficult, but what did you think of the overall result and the expectations that we had coming out of last year's draft?
Well, I mean, you look at the Seahawks only had 2 picks in the top 100. That makes it really hard to make an impact. They ended up getting more out of it than you would expect given the draft capital they went into the draft with. Overall, it's not a bad class, and I think you've got a player here with some absolute star caliber, and then some other nice pieces, but none of them are going to be like, I don't see any of them as guys that you look at as a potential like perennial Pro Bowler other than, the guy at the top. But I wouldn't call it a bad rookie class because you got guys that are starters. You got guys that are going to be contributors. And
I wouldn't be shocked if we have a player that we'll talk about in a minute that wouldn't come forward at some point and make a Pro Bowl, but not perennial probably. But so let's talk about Byron Murphy. Okay, so the way the draft went down was amazingly in Seattle's favor. Seattle needed a defensive player, somebody on the defensive line. We knew that kind of going in. That was going to be it was either going to be that or an offensive guard, a tackle that they may have chosen at that spot that would transition, move inside to guard.
Mm-hmm.
And so when all the offensive players came off the board, and really there was only one player, Lato, drafted before the Seahawks made their pick, you knew it was going to be Byron Murphy, and sure enough, it was, and everyone was pretty ecstatic at this pick, at this spot in the draft. It was a perfect confluence of all the good things that could have happened, and Seattle came away with arguably the best defensive player in the draft.
And that
And
was
then
one
it
of
kind
those
of was a
things
slow
that,
start. I
yeah,
think.
I mean, that was one of the things with this draft is, yeah, Lato went before because pass rushers are a premium, and teams are willing to overdraft edge rushers because they can be so hard to find. But the general consensus across everywhere was that Byron Murphy was the best defensive player in this draft. And for him to fall all the way to 16 for Seattle was just, it felt impossible when you're going through, and when we were doing our mocks and that kind of stuff. You and I both had him on our list of Seahawks at some point, because we wanted him. He was
Yes,
that good. But we also thought, this guy's gonna go 7th, maybe 8th in
7
the
to 9. Yeah,
draft.
right.
In that range. There's no way he's gonna get to 16. And there he was at 16. Boom, Byron Murphy, Seattle Seahawk.
And they didn't have to move up. See, now that there was an opportunity cost that you could have easily justified them moving up to even 9 to pick a player like this if they didn't believe the quarterback that was still available was an option for them. And we all thought that maybe that would happen. It did not.
Well, the
So
Seahawks actually
when he was
talked
there,
about,
it was crazy.
they tried to move up to 8 to get Michael Penix. Atlanta ended up taking him at that spot instead of trading. But they tried to make that move. And so the fact that didn't work out, and then they ended up sitting, they saved the rest of their picks instead of trading a bunch of them away, and ended up with a really good defensive lineman. Is, to me, it ended up working out really well for them. This is the foundational piece that I talked about. The guy that has star power. He had a good rookie season. Maybe not everything has showed up on the stat sheet the way that I think some fans wanted, but his impact in games is on the tape. His ability to command double teams, to not be pushed off his spot, to create push up the middle and allow the outside guys to be able to get sacks because the quarterback can't just step up away from him. The impact is there. And this is from, at a position where rookies have a hard time making an impact. And so,
Let's talk about that a little bit. So he missed 4 games essentially due to injury during the Dolphins game. He came into camp out of shape, got called out for it. Mike McDonald threatened to cut him. Essentially, I don't know. It wasn't serious, probably, but also that message was communicated. So he came along a little slower than you wanted him to, but he finished the season ranked 6th overall for defensive linemen in the rookie class, 6th in rush grade at 54, 4th overall in pass rush grade at 64.5. These are all PFF grades. 23 pressures, which ranked third among rookies. Tavondre Sweat, his teammate at Texas, also had 23 pressures. We were considering him in the second round. Braden Fisk, the defensive tackle that the Rams signed to replace their all-pro defensive tackle, had 51 pressures and 9 sacks. What a season for Brandon Fisk. Unbelievable. But, like you said, he ate up the double teams. He played 3 tech and nose tackle. Had 15
really small
run
for
stops.
a nose too.
But
the fact that they had to play, he played there in part because they had one nose tackle on the team, and he's old and not explosive, and
didn't have a very good year.
And didn't offer much in the way of offered nothing in the way of pass rush, but and so in a sense, Murphy played out of position at times
Yeah.
and still had a very impactful year.
And he was a real instrumental part of a defense that started the year ranked 32 in run defense up till week 8 and finished the season at 16th. And he was a key cog in that. Okay. So there's a piece. Okay. So the final grade for me is a B plus.
Yeah.
And I was considering a B minus or a solid B, but I gave him a B plus just because of the way he finished and the impact he made that is not on the stat sheet, and just his overall effect on the game. And we considered him as a kind of defensive rookie of the year with Tyrese Knight, and I think he was right there. Really, if you're really schooled in what defensive tackles are supposed to do and all that kind of stuff, and really focused on how it affects every other player around him, which is his job, is to make other players better, he did what he was supposed to do.
Yeah. Imagine how much better he would have been if he showed up in shape.
And you're going to get a full off season with the weight staff, the coaching staff, etc.
He will not be
he's
showing
learned
up.
a ton this year. The game is going to slow.
Shape.
Yeah, the game has slowed down for him this season, and when he comes into next year, he'll be ready to go day one.
Yeah.
And so I'm pretty excited about that.
All right. Okay. The next pick, the 81st pick overall, 3rd round pick, guard Christian Haynes out of UConn, drafted to be an instant starter on the offensive line, and is probably the biggest disappointment on the Seahawks roster.
Yes. Starring at the Senior Bowl, Keith, 4-year starter at UConn.
His tape is great.
His tape is good. It's like it's one of those things where the expectation is that this guy is going to be either day 1 starter or by week 8 starter. And it clearly, the disconnect was evident right away. It's like you didn't hear really anything about him in early camps right after the draft. And then when training camp started, he was like 4th on the depth chart, 5th.
Yeah.
And he never really came out of that, and they finally ended up saying, well, he's in a competition with Bradford for right tackle snaps. And Bradford kept winning. And he never made that jump. Like Abe Lucas took him a couple weeks in training camp to go from, 3rd string to 2nd string to starter and never left.
Yeah. And that's what
Haynes never made that move.
That was the expectation for Haynes, because, the rookies always come in lower on the depth chart because they just don't know the offense. They don't know the playbook and that kind of stuff yet. And you don't want those reps with the starters to be screwed up because this one player is not doing, his footwork's wrong and all those kind of things, not blocking the right person. So they start lower on the depth chart. And then as they learn those things, they move up because the talent's there. So we're like, okay, yeah, he's 3rd on the depth chart. He's, behind McClendon Curtis and Bradford, whatever, who cares? He's going to pass those guys. He never did. He never made that jump and got on the field. And then even when Bradford got hurt, he got beat out by another rookie. Like, what happened to this instant starter? This guy that had all the ability. Like, where did it go?
Yeah. Grubb indicated all along, when asked pointedly about what's going on with Haynes, that it was difficult. The difficulties came because of core strength issues and technical issues with learning the scheme and all the things they were asking him to do. And that never really became more clear throughout the year. They were fairly quiet with him, and I think out of just respect for him and wanting to bring him along, in 2025 and so forth, they wanted to give him an opportunity to kind of whatever he needs to do. But, he finished the rookie season with 167 snaps, 6 pressures allowed, 5 hurries, 1 sack, 2 fouls. Pass block grade was 51.9. Run block grade was 49.8. Both just mediocre, at best, which, okay, all that considered, the upside is still there for him. I think having a new regime come in helps him start over.
Yeah.
get whatever off season stuff you need to get done to learn how to be a pro, all that stuff. And so I wanted to kind of get into this with you because I think it really does point to this idea of Mike McDonald not being available in scouting, none of his staff. This was all on John Schneider and the area scouts. What was missed? How was it missed? Why was it missed?
Well,
Does he still become the player everyone thinks he's going to be?
see, that depends on him. It also depends because I don't think it's just like, because they talked about, the reason why Bradford kept starting is just it's raw power and that kind of stuff. But Bradford was so bad, you knew there was more to it. And then when there was an open competition with Lumea and he lost, there was something about it. There's something between the ears, right? There was a guy whose confidence was broken, or a guy who pissed off the wrong coach, and that coach was not going to give him the time of day.
Yeah.
And if it's either of those two things, a new offensive coaching staff could do wonders for him. And that is what it is. We need to see what's going to happen. Yeah, there was some core strength and those kind of issues. That's true for a lot of rookie linemen. They just don't have
Right.
the professional off-season work and training staff and all of that available to them until too late. And so they come
The
back
same thing
second year
happened to
so much
Oluwatimi
better.
the year prior.
Yeah.
That's what makes me question like the scouting and so forth, because that's 2 years in a row with two players that were kind of expected to come in and make an impact right away. Now you could say Oluwatimi, maybe wasn't
Oluwatimi
quite.
he was a 5th round pick,
Yes,
and he was a guy who was a 5th round
but
pick,
also
not
the Outland Trophy Award winner.
true, but his testing was poor. You knew athletically he was a limited player. He was really smart. He was the general, the field general of a really good offensive line because he had great people around him, but he was an athletically limited guy. Haynes was not an athletically limited guy. This is a guy that should have been, was athletically like great. And he dominated at the Senior Bowl against some of the top defensive linemen. So you're
Yes.
looking at him and you're like, all right, it's all there. And then it just never materializes with the team. And for me, I kind of look at everything that happened this year, not just with him, but with him and with other guys. And I wonder greatly about Huff as the offensive line coach.
Mm-hmm.
And
He did develop the other guys though. So
Did he?
you gotta take your hat off to Lemay and the fact that he was developed enough to come in and be competent, and then really kind of just hold down that spot, even though he was ranked, near dead last in the NFL as far as guards are concerned. It wasn't a situation where you were talking about him all the time.
Yeah.
And Michael Jarrell came in at right tackle for a few games, and
at guards, there were 76 qualifying guards according to Pro Football Focus, and the Seahawks had number 76, number 71, number 60, what was it, 66, and number 61. Those are the guards. They had no guard that should have started. Not a single one of them developed and played well. And that is including Lumea. As much as you and I like him and saw some great things from him, when he made mistakes, he made really bad mistakes that ended drives.
It's the pass blocking, really. It's where we're talking about. I think the run blocking was okay, but even that, and even that at short yardage was just, they were getting blown off the line. So, but anyway, for Haynes's marks, I give him a D. He wasn't an F because he didn't get cut,
Yeah, and
but he was a
there's still
D because the
promise.
expectations were so high, and he failed on almost all accounts.
Yeah, I was also thinking a D. My initial thought was F, but I'm like, no, he's still on the roster. There's still a chance for development. We know that there's still something there. Um, and there's a guy later in this draft that is a demonstration of
Yes,
what an F
right,
looks like. So we'll get there.
correct.
So in the fourth round, they had two
Okay,
picks.
so next,
Go ahead.
yeah. Well, when this player was drafted, I think there's expectations here that so high on needing interior offensive line help that I think there was an expectation there. There was an expectation that they might draft a center again.
Mm-hmm.
There were some centers available, or a tight end at this spot. Um, all of that, right? And so they drafted linebacker Tyrese Knight out of UTEP with the 118th overall pick. And at the time, I just remember you and I thinking, well, here was a player so far down on our linebacker list that we really didn't even talk about him. It was one of those borderline sixth round grades with maybe, worst case scenario, undrafted rookie free agent kind of a thing, which is where he was.
Yeah,
Not just with
I didn't think
us,
he was
but with
that low, but
everyone.
yeah, sixth round was kind of where I had him. And the reason is because it felt like a bad scheme fit. Everything that the Seahawks had done up to that point, they brought in two middle linebackers who maybe weren't tackling machines but could fly and were in coverage. And then they drafted this kid who is
A smaller
um,
school, UTEP, El
and
Paso, Texas, El
and he's
Paso.
a um, he's an old school linebacker that comes forward and makes plays in the running game, but isn't good moving laterally and making covering and those kind of stuff. He's a run downhill into the gap and clobber a running back kind of guy. It's just too old school, and it's not anything of what it looked like McDonald wanted. This to me was the pick that signified that the coaching staff didn't get the input because this didn't look like
This
anything that McDonald would have wanted.
and and it signified to me the end of the draft. It's like now they're just throwing darts, really. I mean, we talked about the draft being pretty decent between rounds 1 through 5. And after that, they kind of dropped off, and a lot of players are going to
Mm-hmm.
get drafted that were kind of undrafted grades. And I was thinking, well, this is kind of the shelf. This is the
Yep.
cliff where it kind of drops, and they're going to just start taking players that have some upside. And
And hope.
I agree with you for the most part on what we saw on film with Tyrese Knight, a guy that's, downhill, can make tackles, come up to the line of scrimmage, kind of a rumble guy, which is great. But it kind of went against what they'd done in free agency, which showed that they were going to bring in guys that were more adept at defending the pass, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what they were so poor at the year prior. And this regime was going to do it a little differently. They looked at the roster and they wanted to construct it a certain way, and they brought in Dodson and Baker, and it was like, well, we're just going to get another Dodson or Baker as a rookie and develop them.
No,
Well, that's
instead
the opposite of what they did, right?
instead they drafted a replacement for Jordan Brooks.
The only
As a
thing I will say is, yes, it was what he showed on film, because UTEP, that's what they asked him to do. But if you go deep, a little deeper, he did have a little bit more athleticism than I think we were giving him credit for.
He did. And it was like he did have the athleticism to do it, but he never did it. This wasn't who he was. It's about instincts. He was more than we gave him credit for. He was a better fit for McDonald than we gave him credit for. Um,
Yes.
he
And
came
I do
in.
believe that McDonald, this was his pick.
Yeah. The thing is that it was interesting because there was something that happened because um, McDonald basically refused to praise him during
Yes.
camp and preseason. He looked good. He was making plays, and McDonald just refused to praise him. he's like, no, he needs to get better at this. And he needs to get better at this. And it's not just one thing. Like you got to be the complete,
right.
thing. And
Yes,
just
you got to show up every day. Right.
And then, beginning of the season, he got some, and then he was a healthy scratch for a few games, like not even inactive.
I've noticed that this is a key motivating factor that McDonald uses.
And then
to get two players.
When the defense kind of bottomed out, and that's when they traded for Jones, and they made some other adjustments.
Dotson was cut.
And they cut Dotson, who had the most snaps of anyone on defense at that point, led the team in tackles. All of a sudden, they cut him and insert Tyrese Knight as the starting middle linebacker.
Along with Ernest Jones. Yeah.
Yep. And
the run defense immediately improved. Immediately.
The pass defense improved. The entire defense improved. And Tyrese Knight showed that he was a legitimate NFL starter in this league as a rookie. He was a tackling machine. Yes, that's what he was in college, but he was so much more. He was a much more complete player than any of us ever expected, especially given all the semi-negative things that McDonald had said about him.
Well, when you say so much more, what you really mean is so well-rounded. Like he just wasn't one thing. He was everything that you would want out of this position. He was everything that I think the Seahawks were hoping they would get out of Dodson. Now, we all knew that Baker had some limitations and so forth, but he was kind of a seasoned pro, 1 year kind of stopgap kind of thing. But, not only did Tyrese Knight only miss 6 tackles on the entire season, he was second best in coverage among linebackers in coverage, finished the year with 10 pressures so they can scheme him up a little bit. So, he had 2 sacks from the position, 2 quarterback hits, 6 hurries, also second among rookies, 88 combined stops, adding a sack and a half and a pass breakup. So just a complete player, really. And the best case scenario we could have hoped for out of that 4th round pick that we thought was a reach.
Yeah. I mean, he ended up being, when we get to this, based partly on him and a little bit on draft position, because the 118th pick, fourth round, you're not expecting much from, and they got a lot.
You're looking for a special teams contributor.
Yeah. And instead they got a special contributor.
Yes. So I gave him an A-. Only because he only started 10 games. The same 10 games.
I'll give you that. I just put A, because I'm looking, we're talking about rookies, so we're looking forward. It's the same reason why Haynes didn't get an F. It's entirely looking forward and knowing that the contributions should still come. But I gave him an A because he's clearly the guy. You look at, and I'm going to probably do this for a couple more years until, everything's kind of filled out and we get a better feel for McDonald's defense in Seattle versus trying to compare everything to Baltimore. But Tyrese Knight was the perfect Patrick Queen. He was Robin to Ernest Jones Batman. He was exactly what the team needed in that position.
Yes,
and to get it that low in the draft, that late in a draft that was very top heavy and very weak in the later rounds. That was a masterful job by McDonald and Schneider to get that guy.
I agree. And it's so funny because you go through the season, and if you're on Twitter or Blue Sky or whatever, any social, you're just constantly battling. Now, I don't do it, in person or online because I just don't play that game, but you're constantly battling with folks who are trying to tear down John Schneider over, nitpicking this, that, the other, hindsight 2020 type crap. And it's picks like this, though, that really solidify the team. It's like you need players of depth on a team and a roster that maybe they're not going to be Pro Bowlers, but you had KJ Wright for years on the Seahawks defense that played a very key role that made Bobby Wagner great.
And wasn't a Pro Bowler. He didn't make the Pro Bowl until the very end.
Right.
but he was such a key cog. And that is the type of player that Tyrese Knight is. He's going to be the KJ Wright to Ernest Jones's Bobby Wagner. Like,
yes,
sometimes you need Robin to help Batman, and that's who he is. But he is that because he was so complete. He was so well-rounded, and not what his what his scouting report was coming out of college. He's such a better player than that.
Now, I could use a little bit more depth at this position overall. You got to look at what Drake Thomas looks like and so forth. I think the team really likes his ability and so forth. But I will say this: if something should happen to Ernest Jones, I am confident in Knight's ability to run that defense in the middle.
Yes, but what I'm not confident in is anybody else on this roster to take Tyrese Knight's spot as the other inside linebacker.
So they do need to address that, I think, in the offseason.
That, I think, is the problem. You'd see a massive drop in the quality of the defense if Jones got hurt, because you wouldn't have.
And every team in the NFL battles this particular problem.
Depth is a major issue. Yep.
Especially at linebacker, because the team doesn't really want to invest too much into that spot. I get that. Okay.
The next pick in the fourth round, just 3 picks later at 121, is a guy that I didn't hate. I didn't necessarily like, because I thought they were more dynamic players.
We talked about him pre-draft, and we're just saying, he's another guy.
He's there. AJ Barner. He had draft grades that got into the 3rd round, so this wasn't considered a reach. There was a big cliff after him, though. Yeah, but one of the guys that I thought was above him was still there. But it was kind of he's an incomplete player. The athleticism's there. The blocking is there, although it's slightly unrefined. He could get better at it, but he's still a pretty good blocker. But the production in the in the passing game and the routes and that kind of stuff, it was so undeveloped. And you're like, you could do better. But we're also talking.
It was Will Disley-esque, if you will, coming out of college.
So you're talking 4th round into 4th round. I'm like, you'd seen draft predictions where he went a little higher, somewhere he went a little lower. It was good value in terms of that. It just was unexciting. There wasn't any wow factor to a blocking tight end that might someday develop into a not a weapon, but a reliable situational receiver.
Yeah.
And that's who he was at the beginning.
So the last show, Keith, we named this guy Rookie of the Year on offense.
Yeah.
Yep. So he went from what you just described to how we ended up. Now, what was in between?
What was in between was him, those blocking technique and thing kind of stuff that needed cleaning up got cleaned up. And he became a very good blocker as an inline blocker for a tight end, which I know super exciting. Fans love inline blocking tight ends. But it's valuable. It was valuable to Seattle because when you saw the running game start to work in Arizona and in LA, he was there. He was a key part. They were pulling him, bringing him on a slice block to the backside, or just having him be the point of attack. He could do the things. He also then translated the fact that teams were expecting him to block and kind of keying on trying to stay off of him, because they knew that once he got his hands on someone, they were done. That meant that he could escape into the passing game much smoother, and started to become a guy that Gino depended on 3rd down to get open, get the ball, started making some tough catches in traffic. Just was a guy that just continued to get better at all facets of his game throughout the year. And at the end of the year, honestly, he's the type of guy that might make Noah Fant dispendable. This is just a great. They got a lot out of him this year, but the production going forward is going to be big. There's a lot of expectation.
Among rookies, he had the 2nd best grade as a receiving tight end, behind only Brock Bowers in the rookie class. Also trailed the rookie pick. Yeah, well, and a Pro Bowler from the get-go. Trailed the Raiders rookie in touchdowns by a count of 5-4. However, Barner did it in 37 targets and 30 receptions, and Bowers did it in 148 targets and 112 receptions. Also finished 11th among qualifying tight ends with 5.8 yards after the catch per reception. This is a guy that gave you just a lot more receiving in his rookie year than we probably thought was even possible. Even though our tight end room consisted of Farrell Brown and AJ Barner at backing up Noah Fant. I thought AJ Barner was the best tight end this season, consistently overall. Just when you take a look at where he started and where he improved, where he finished, Noah Fant finished okay, but also AJ Barner's a complete tight end. Noah Fant is not.
Noah Fant is a receiver.
Yes.
He's not the terrible blocker that we've seen in other tight ends, named Jimmy Graham, but he's not good. Whereas AJ Barner was very good. It's very good.
To your point about potential moving on from Noah Fant, the reason that you might want to do that is you could save $11.5 million against the cap if you did that. And you could build around AJ Barner as your primary tight end, kind of a combo tight end. And you could draft or get a free agent, kind of a receiving tight end, kind of a Colby Parkinson, for example, as a complement to an AJ Barner, and go a much less inexpensive investment at the tight end position for a few years.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity. And so that's what AJ Barner has given the Seahawks as far as that flexibility, which is really cool. I loved his physicality. I liked his attitude when he caught touchdowns. It was amazing. He moved the chains on a couple of really key conversions to keep drives going, to allow Geno Smith to have those end of game kind of scenarios. Just really liked the way that pick turned out. And also for me, an A-. The reason I want to assign an A- is because I just want that little teeny tad bit of room to improve slightly. And I think AJ Barner has the opportunity. Like his last 4 or 5 games of production was just like very consistent, very on point, like 4 or 5 receptions, 40, 50, 60 yards, a touchdown. Like if he can do that the entire season, he's going to be a fringy Pro Bowl kind of a guy.
Yeah. He's the guy that when we said Byron Murphy looks like he's going to be a perennial Pro Bowler. And then after that, those guys that can develop into that, he's the guy that could develop into that, because I think that, given more opportunity and more development time, you're going to see a bump in his stats to put him in that fringy Pro Bowl level as far as receptions, but then with the reputation of being one of the best blocking tight ends in the game on top of that.
Yes.
Now you're looking at like a guy that's going to have that respect from around the league. He's going to be kind of viewed as the way George Kittle is.
I'm just
really
curious
think that's where he's headed.
As to see how a run game focused offensive coordinator and staff will look at him, and in what regard. I'm sure they'll have input from Geno on Geno's ability to trust Barner in certain situations and so forth. But I would imagine his numbers continue to increase. His role continues to increase.
Agreed.
I don't expect Noah Fant to be back, to be completely honest. I think he's either restructured. They could extend him, choose to extend him, or whatever. I think you wait for the offensive coordinator to come in to look at all the film and figure out Noah Fant, because Noah Fant's got the ability to be utilized much more than he was. And he isn't. For some reason, there's something there about Noah Fant. And it was the previous regime as well had issues using Noah Fant to, I think, his ability, because we see it occasionally. He makes these big time catches against the sideline. He moves the chains. He runs hard, etc. Not a great blocker. You're not asking him to do that a lot anyway, but there's something there where something's missing.
Is it something missing, or is that missing competency at offensive coordinator? Because we saw
it's something something's missing, right?
We saw Grubb had significant problems as an offensive coordinator, and Shane Waldron the Bears fired him halfway
After
through his
10
first
weeks.
season with them.
Mm-hmm.
They clearly had seen enough and were like, no, this guy just doesn't know what he's doing. So I don't know.
Right.
There's you go back to when Fant was in Denver and he put up some pretty big numbers.
And drafted in the first round for a reason.
Yeah.
Okay,
All
so
right.
what grade do you
After
give
Barner,
Gardner? An A?
I
A plus?
was going to say an A just because their production was there this year and
Yeah.
it started from the beginning. He had to fight his way onto the field a little bit because the team wanted to give Pharaoh Brown, the snaps because of the veteran status and whatever. But honestly, Pharaoh Brown was such an afterthought all year because Barner was instantly that number 2 guy behind Fant, and so I thought it was there. I mean, A minus I'm okay with also because you're right. He can and will continue to improve. After Barner, though, you and I talked about it a couple times here on the show. There was kind of a shelf. The talent pool dropped off really quickly in this last draft. And there's a lot of guys that would be undrafted free agents in other years being drafted in the 5th round, late 4th round in this draft. Good at the top, but bad at the bottom.
Mm-hmm.
And so you kind of hit that cliff at AJ Barner, and getting anything out of the guys that came after, I think was a bonus.
Yes.
So
Agreed.
what did you think of the next pick?
So Seattle selected Nehemiah Pritchett from Auburn with the 5th round, 136 overall pick. I was disappointed, to be completely honest. I didn't, based on the previous regimes and so forth, and the long history of Pete Carroll, this was not an ideal fit guy at corner. I kind of questioned some things, but again, 5th round pick, it's a developmental project, etc. But here's how it ended. He played 151 defensive snaps for the Seahawks and had the lowest grade among all rookies in the NFL. On 20 targets, he gave up 13 receptions, 205 yards, a touchdown, 1 pass deflection. Also, he struggled, as you would expect for his size, at tackling. Had 6 missed tackles on those 51 defensive snaps, 33% missed tackle rate, 33% missed tackle rate, tied for the highest percentage among rookie cornerbacks in the NFL. And to me, I'm not sure I see the developmental progress and this season and or future for him on the roster. I think that if you had a normal offseason talent increase in the cornerback room, Pritchett becomes expendable or fringy practice squad level player in 2025.
Yeah, I could see that. I like his measurables. I like he's long. He's not tall, but he's long. I think there's talent that can be
He runs a
utilized.
4.34 or something like that as well, right? So, I
Yeah,
mean,
so
there's that.
he's got speed and he's got length, which are 2 things you can't coach.
If you could develop him into a returner, that would have been fantastic. That would have added so much more value for him. I think that he could work his way on as a special teams guy.
So basically, you're making him D. Williams.
Why not?
Yeah,
you need guys like that on your team for sure.
You need guys like that, and you need guys that. Some guys like they've got to find a way onto the roster, and if that's how he finds his way onto a roster, cool. I think there's more developmental ability there than you do, but I completely understand. Like
I graded him out as a C minus essentially.
Yeah, especially given where he was in the draft and how much of a developmental project he was. That's about right. I think that he's a guy that I want to see next year, and then we'll kind of have a better idea. We didn't see much of him. When we did see him, he was kind of thrust in. He was out there running the scout team, and so not even practicing our defense, but trying to mimic what other teams' defenses did to help Gino prepare.
Well, here's the deal with Pritchett. He's on the best defensive coach team in the NFL. What a great position to be in. So if he can learn, absorb, coaches are putting him in the best position to be successful, he's got the best opportunity to improve and to hang on a roster. I'm rooting for the kid. I just didn't see enough this year to be confident that that's going to happen.
Yeah, C- is probably good. He got on the field at the last couple of games,
Yes, he did.
and was able to play more at the end of the season. And I thought, given what we saw earlier in the year when he was forced into play and it was bad,
He was lost.
what he was doing at the end of the year was significantly better. So there was some improvement there. But it was
I get your
really
point.
bad early in the year. So yeah, we'll see. And all right, so that's the 5th round. We have 3 6th-round picks to wrap up this draft.
Okay, let's kind of go through these, but this one I want to spend a little bit of time with. So at 179 overall in the 6th round, we chose tackle in college, Satoa Lemea from Utah.
Instantly moved him into guard.
Yeah, sure. He's going to be a guard.
He didn't have the length.
Right.
He was never going to be a NFL tackle.
So here's the deal about this guy. In camp and training camp, he had probably a better chance of being cut before the regular season of him landing any snaps during the regular season. Like this guy was going to be a development. We were told even this guy's going to be a developmental guy. It's a project. He needs to build core strength. He came from a program where he was at tackle. We're going to move him inside. He's going to need to learn that position, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. And then he was inactive essentially through week 13. We didn't even talk about him as being an option. It's like, well, the coaches don't believe he's an option. He's not an option. And then, so all of a sudden, his name comes up.
That we were kind of surprised he made the roster instead of being on the practice squad.
Correct. And if he would have been on the practice squad, we wouldn't have thought anything of it, and probably no other teams would have picked him up, or maybe they would have. I don't know. But anyway, here we are. Bradford gets hurt. All of a sudden, we start hearing his name, like he's practicing with the ones. What? Like what? Where's Christian Haynes? Like what's happening here, right? And all of a sudden, Haynes is essentially an afterthought, and Lumea is starting his first career game after being inactive for 13 straight weeks. And so that was crazy, right? But he played, and then he didn't play horrible and was better than Bradford had been playing. And we were like, okay. So Lemea came out of nowhere, and he looks competent enough. Let's roll with that. And that's what the team did. Haynes never displaced him. He started the remaining 6 games or whatever it was in the season, and his run blocking looked respectable, and combined over there with Abe Lucas, that kind of aspect of it improved. Combined with Abe Lucas over there, the pass blocking was okay, and they just kind of limped along through the season. Now the offense clearly overall never really completely improved, but they had some moments. And
I think one of the things that I need to kind of jump in with is his first game as the starter there. We were like, oh, this kid can play. Like, he looked pretty good. But his second game there looked genuinely terrible.
I think that was the 49ers or something like that, right?
Yeah, it was like Arizona and then San Francisco. And so he had one game that was good and one game that was bad. And then he was really inconsistent. He was up and down. You and I kind of gave him the benefit of the doubt because of he graded completely crappy.
I mean, when we talk about his grades here in a second, he's just not good.
Yep. But there's enough there. There were flashes there. There were weeks where he did enough that I think he has to be in the mix next year. I mean, you want to bring someone in, whether it be Haynes or whether it be someone else, to play that spot, sure, but he's going to be competing with them because
and you worst case scenario, you've got a competent swing guard.
Yeah, and I still think, God damn, I know I've said this 100 times, his athletic profile, what he does, and when you watch his tape and the way when they would pull him, what he looks like, that guy should be a center. Put him at center. He'll be better there.
Are you talking about Haynes or Lumea?
Lumea.
Yeah. So the team, I'll just let everyone know this. The team actually had Christian Haynes taking center snaps the last 2 weeks of practice.
Yep.
And it would not surprise me at all if they try to develop him over there. Now, regarding Lumea, I was thinking when you started talking about some athleticism and the ability to pull all that kind of stuff, I was thinking left guard because Laken Tomlinson is going to be leaving after this season as well. So, he had the worst grade among rookies at the offensive guard position overall at 17.8. Now, the second worst grade overall was 41.9. So that's kind of a huge thing. So he surrendered 23 pressures, 17 of which came against the Packers and at 10 and the Vikings at 7. So in those two games with really good defensive lines, he struggled mightily, and so did our offense. And so anyway, I think he's got some room there. He's going to be in the mix. Yes. So we will just say that he is going to be in the mix for a starting role in 2025, but there are going to be some wholesale changes. It just really depends on the regime that's coming in, the offensive line coach, and what they do in free agency and the draft. There are going to be other players, competition. We'll see what we have. If Lumea ends up rising to the top and has a great offseason, is in the offseason program, and he's the guy, good. But he could also be regulated to a backup spot.
To do what they did with Oluwatimi a year ago and just assume that he's going to be the guy would be a dreadful mistake.
Agreed. I don't see that happening. They can't make the same mistake 2 years in a row, can they?
No. All right. The next pick
sixth round.
Easily the worst pick that John Snyder has made in the last few years.
Agreed. I don't even know why they made this pick. This is completely a waste of pick. They could have drafted a running back. They could have drafted a safety. They could have drafted another interior offensive lineman or a tackle to replace Stone Forsythe. There's a number of different spots they could have addressed, but they doubled down on corner here, which is crazy to me.
They could have drafted a kid that runs out and picks up the tee during kickoff returns, and it would have been a better pick. But at 192nd in their sixth round pick, cornerback DJ James out of Auburn. It's Nehemiah Pritchett's running mate. This guy, the athleticism was not there. And it's telling. Like, he just was not, he didn't have the athletic body of an NFL player. And he came out, struggled in camp, got cut. Didn't even and no other team wanted him. He is out of football.
No. He went to the New England Patriots, worst roster in football, and made their practice squad, and he stayed there the entire season. So I almost gave him F+, and the plus being he made somebody else's practice squad.
He didn't make anyone's then he didn't make their practice squad right away. And when I did a Google search on his name, it came up with the only things that came up were Seattle cutting him.
Used car salesman.
Yeah. And so like nobody claimed him. Nobody signed him to the practice squad. Like the first couple of rounds of signings. So even once people brought guys in on their practice squad and then realized that they weren't it and cut them and brought in another crop of guys, he wasn't involved in any of those. So yeah, I guess eventually he ended up with New England. But
okay. Next.
He's not an NFL player. That was a bad pick. And then finally, the biggest project of them all, at the 207th pick, still in the sixth round, because Seattle didn't take anything in the seventh, was tackle Michael Jarrell out of Finley.
Yeah.
Major project. This is a guy with athleticism, the body type, and whatever. But
this is the guy I assumed would be a cut and put on the practice squad right from the very beginning.
Yeah, agreed. And never was.
But it didn't happen. He stayed on the roster.
He stuck around, and he actually got a couple starts at right tackle when they finally were like, okay, they're just trying to get to Lucas, and Forsyth had been such a disaster.
Yeah.
And Fant
George Fant hurt. Yeah.
Had been hurt.
And Jason Peters, who was also on the practice squad, never elevated.
Yep. They couldn't get Peters in shape fast enough. He's 42. Honestly, as someone in their 40s, the idea that you're going to go from your couch to the NFL in more than, or in anywhere under about 6 months.
Peters set his hamburger down, picked up the phone. They said, "You want to pay me to do what?
Yeah.
Come back and sit on a practice squad roster for a while. Okay, I'll be there."
Yeah. So they brought him in because they were just desperate.
Yeah.
And so,
but this guy, Gerald, starts four games, played in 6 overall, 250 snaps, 15 pressures allowed, 3 sacks allowed, 2 hits, 10 hurries allowed, third worst run block grade and the second worst pass block grade overall in the rookie class, 6 penalties, including multiple holds, that gave up some big plays.
Mm-hmm.
It is what it is. But
his first
thankfully
game
for him, thank you, Mike Gerald. Thank you.
Yep.
You were better than expectations, even being the worst in the rookie class, because otherwise it would have been, I don't know what. So
expectations
you came in and started
were so
for a while.
low.
Yes.
Expectations were so low that being better than expectations does not mean that much. But he was a project. That kid should have never seen the field this year.
Correct.
He didn't have.
And the nice thing is he got the experience. He got some experience. He developed, as far as he got on the field, and played in an NFL game. Good for him. Took 250 snaps. That's a lot of experience for a young kid. He's going to go into the offseason program. He's going to be on the roster next year because he's so inexpensive. Stone Forsythe is an unrestricted free agent guy. I don't see him coming back. Mike Gerald takes the place of Stone Forsythe on the roster, probably.
As a swing tackle. Yeah, and actually, I think given him going into year 2, because when he came in, his footwork was not good. His technique was bad. He's coming out of Finlay, so there's so much learning that needs to happen just of what is going on around him, and the speed of the game difference is going to be crazy. Like, he was a project. He got on the field 4 games, didn't look good. I mean, he looked pretty damn good for 1 game, and then was absolutely pathetic for the other 3. But the fact that he could develop into Stone Forsythe, which again, low bar to get over, means he's already better. It's already better than where he's selected in terms of draft in this particular draft.
Or right at where he's at, really, because I think Stone Forsythe was selected in the 6th round as well. So So overall, Keith, and you can go line item by line item, but how would you grade the overall class?
Overall class, I graded this as a B. I love Byron Murphy. I love Tyrese Knight and AJ Barner, and then everything else is kind of meh. But if you get 3 starters out of a draft class, especially 3 key contributing
and a potential
starters,
superstar,
which I think they do. Yeah. That's a pretty good draft class. And with very little draft capital, just 2 picks in the top 100. That's a pretty good group. And if any of Gerald or Lumea or Pritchett
or Christian Haynes
develop and actually get on the field again in a meaningful way, that's even better. So
here's my thought, Keith, on Christian Haynes. He was the one player you'd mentioned, Tyrese Knight as being the guy maybe that could earn some Pro Bowl recognition at some point, or even AJ Barner. And I would say that there's an outside opportunity too, that Christian Haynes develops into the player that we all thought he was eventually. And that player could be a player that could be a full-time starter and develop into a competent, for example, if we hired the offensive line coach from the Lions, Farley. Farley, I can't remember. Yeah, I think so. A guy like that comes in and develops the offensive line to a point where a guy like Christian Haynes has an opportunity to be, potentially fringy Pro Bowl kind of guy. So I think, there are some opportunities for this draft class to grow still. But you're right. Getting Byron Murphy, you could potentially look at a Pro Bowl guy in Byron Murphy. They're at the top. Christian Haynes, I think, needs to develop. I think he will to a certain extent. We'll see. Tyrese Knight's already there. AJ Barner is there and will, I think, get even better and more opportunities in 2025 and beyond. Lamea has proven that he can at least be a competent backup in this league, and may develop into that starter in this very offseason. And so there's a lot to like overall on the class. Obviously, you've got some throwaway picks at the end there, but we'll see. But yeah, I'm with you on the B. I think solid B could elevate to a B plus if Christian Haynes develops.
Yep. But a lot of it hinges on Byron Murphy. The draft class as a whole is potential superstar in Byron Murphy.
Yes.
A couple of key contributors, the 4th round picks, and then we'll see.
Yes. And that's really all you hope for out of almost any draft. You go back and look at drafts, 3 years after a draft is a pretty good barometer of where you were at. And most drafts, you end up with three guys that are core guys. That's four guys if you're lucky. Yeah. And that's where we're at. We already got our 3. We know that for sure. Like Barner, Knight, Murphy are going to be there. And if Christian Haynes develops into a starter or even Lamea, this draft, I think, is a home run, really.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay.
See why I didn't want to tack this show onto the other one. We're at an hour.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, we've got some nice shows coming up. I will say that we've got some more offensive coordinator shows, updates, all that kind of stuff. We're going to take a deep dive into the salary cap. We are going to talk about a high level look at free agency. We kind of want to have a roster evaluation, position group analysis, sort of a show. And then we'll take a look at free agency, how we can supplement, how many dollars we can get by doing the salary cap show. Will give us an idea of what we can do in free agency. And then from there, we start talking about prospects. The Senior Bowl is at the end of the month, as in the first or 2nd of February. Yeah. So it comes up quick, Keith. Start your studying, man. Start looking at players.
I've already started. There's just way too much to.
It's overwhelming when you first start. It's crazy, but we'll get there. We always do. Cool. So let's get out of here. You can find Keith on Blue Sky at Myers NFL. Find me at NW Seahawk. The show is Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Find us on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube channel. Subscribe, like, share, comment. Talk to you soon.
Yep. Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Bill is at NW Seahawk, Keith is at Myers NFL, and the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.